Now, Parkinson's disease is the second most common neurodegenerative disease, and it's characterized by typical motor deficits, including slowness of movement, tremors, rigidity, and postural instability, as well as a series of non-motor symptoms such as disordered smell perception, constipation, and depression. Now, does inflammation in the brain lead to this malfunction? So to discuss this debilitating condition, we've invited Dr. Paulo to join us to shed some light on the topic. Paulo, Parkinson's is an interesting one. I mean, we know so much about it, but yet we know so little about it. What do we know what causes Parkinson's?
It's a developing field. We have some ideas, but we know what we call the pathological features. So we know when it is there, we know what we see, and there are two main ones. So we see that there's the progressive death of dopaminergic neurons. So there are neurons that produce dopamine in a specific part of the brain called substantia nigra pars. And that part basically controls, or is one of the parts that controls motor function, motor control. The second feature is the presence of Lewy bodies, L-E-W-Y, Lewy bodies, and these are abnormal or protein deposits, a protein called alpha-synuclein. So those are the two main features that we observe in such brains once the evidence is there. Unfortunately, symptoms develop when about 80% of these neurons have already been destroyed. Okay, so which is far too late for one to be able to do much about it usually. 10% of cases are familial or genetic. And the rest of the cases are really sporadic.
Okay. Now, Paulo, you mentioned dopamine receptors and things like that in the brain. Let's go back and just do a refresher of what dopamine actually does in the brain.
Right. For the purposes of Parkinson's, dopamine has functions that have to do with motor control, with memory, with mood, and as well as with general behavior. Okay,
right. Now, in terms of the loss of neurons, that's part of this process of degeneration, what is happening there?
Well, it is caused by neuroinflammation, so that's inflammation of the neuronal tissue. It is caused by an excess of free radicals, so that's oxidative stress. But very importantly, it's caused by mitochondrial dysfunction.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So if it's caused by mitochondrial dysfunction, what is mitochondria function on the other hand?
So mitochondria, as we've spoken about often, are the organelles inside each cell that produce energy. So they're the power stations.
Yes.
So in other words, the presence of mitochondria determines whether a cell lives or dies. Because if there's no energy, the cell can't live, can't do what it should be doing. Now, we have a process called mitophagy. And mitophagy means that there's a selective breaking down of damaged and old mitochondria, which happens on a regular basis to maintain balance, mitochondrial balance, as new mitochondria are made.
Sort of a cleaning out of the old.
It's sort of a cleaning out, yes.
Okay.
And it is primarily a genetic process. In other words, there's a genetic code that must be put into place when these mitochondria are present. Now, one of the major issues in Parkinson's disease is the progressive accumulation of these damaged mitochondria. And that means that not enough energy is produced, which means that leads to neuronal cell death. And if the cell dies and another dies, eventually the tissue dies. So that's neurodegeneration.
Right.
So that's one of the greatest areas of research at the moment, mitochondrial dysfunction, specifically the fact that these damaged mitochondria are not being removed as they should be removed.
Are there things that we can do from a lifestyle perspective that could assist or improve or change that process?
So in terms of lifestyle measures, it's very difficult. So we know that exposure to herbicides, pesticides, insecticides, in fact, we mimic Parkinson's in the laboratory by using rotenone.
Okay.
Which is a well-known pesticide.
Right.
And it gives you Parkinson's,
Wow.
perfect Parkinson's. So limiting exposure to chemicals is obviously beneficial. Making sure that inflammatory levels are as low as possible, so that means eating non-inflammatory foods, eating fatty fish because of omega-3 fatty acids. There is also an inverse relationship between the occurrence of Parkinsonian symptoms and the levels of vitamin D3 in the body.
Okay.
So it is found vitamin D3 is invariably very, very low, and it has been low from about midlife, because remember Parkinson's is usually a late
older
development. Controlling cholesterol is also very important because of what is called lipotoxicity. So those would be sort of the general guidelines.
Okay, all right. Now, Dr. Paulo, we love to dive into a medical study on real health. So the scientific journal Biomolecules in 2021 published an article on the vitamin-like factor known as PQQ, in which they state that PQQ is a protective in neurodegeneration, including Parkinson's disease. So let's dig into that a little bit to understand it better.
Right. So in that specific, that was a review that was done by the University of Oklahoma and the University of California in the United States. They combined, they did a review of all the research, and they found that PQQ reduces the level of inflammation by reducing the activation of microglia. These are specific pro-inflammatory cells in the brain tissue. By reducing the level of inflammation, it reduces the level of neurotoxicity, all right, which then means that the dopaminergic neurons don't become toxic.
Okay.
More important than that, it was also shown that it regulates mitophagy. Remember what we spoke about? So it regulates the removal, the selective removal of damaged mitochondria. And it also reduces the formation of Lewy bodies.
Okay.
Okay, those abnormal protein structures that form in various parts of the brain stem. Okay, so in all of these, it was found that PQQ was beneficial.
Okay. Now, we've spoken about PQQ before, and it's included in a product from Coin Healthcare, which is Biomax PQQ with microactive CoQ10. How is this then useful in the Parkinson's situation, if we can call it that? I mean, it's not going to prevent, but if we're managing Parkinson's, how do we?
Well, that's a very good question, what you've just said at the end, because what I was going to start saying is that it is better to prevent.
Okay.
Okay, so there's research, there's a lot of research on Parkinson's in PQQ, where they research, for example, when we do it in laboratories with cells only, all right, we can pre-treat the cells with PQQ and then induce Parkinson's with rotenone.
Right, yes.
And see the effect. Or we can treat cells that have already been treated with rotenone first. Okay, so what I'm saying is it would be obviously always better to prevent. So it has been found that in the laboratory, cells that have been pre-treated with PQQ do not develop Parkinsonian symptoms, such as the cells that were not pre-treated when they are affected by a pesticide like rotenone.
Yes.
Okay, so that's important. There's also research on cells that were never pre-treated with anything.
Okay.
And also with human models and animal models. In the case of this particular product, the PQQ in here is called Bio-PQQ. Let's just see, this is called Biomax PQQ, which is the proprietary name of the product.
Right.
But the PQQ inside is from Japan. It's Bio-PQQ. It's put together through a patented fermentation process, and it has undergone clinical trials where it has been shown that it induces the formation of new mitochondria, which is another effect of PQQ.
Yes.
It's called mitochondrial genesis. So it has a good effect in that it also produces neural growth factor, and therefore it is been shown to be effective. It also contains microactive coenzyme Q10, this particular product. And microactive coenzyme Q10 is a patented form of coenzyme Q10, which in terms of Parkinson's, there's also a lot of research about it. I remember one that is about 20 years old, but it is still valid. It was from 2002, where it was shown that in Parkinsonian patients, coenzyme Q10 also improved symptoms.
So mentioning prevention is better than cure, obviously, is it something that we should be considering taking as a matter of course?
Okay, primarily it's a financial question in terms of affordability on part of the individual, all right. It's also a question where one has to make sure that one's preventative program is well organized. Some items can be cycled. So in other words, you could take it for 2 months, rest for a month or two, take another. And when you rest on one product, you could take another. So I'm just giving you generic sort of guidelines. Preferably, this should be done in conjunction with a knowledgeable healthcare practitioner. Okay, but in terms of Biomax PQQ, if you're going to do prevention, you can't wait until symptoms, because in terms of Parkinson's, by the time you get symptoms, as I said earlier, 80% of the neurons roughly are gone.
Yeah.
So it's much better to start long before. In terms of the genetic impact, it's very important to know that studies have been done on PQQ content of newborn babies. And it has been found that babies whose mothers have low PQQ content in what we call the neonatal period and the perinatal periods, which is basically from 22 weeks gestation up to 28 days after birth. If the mothers have low PQQ content, so do the babies, but moreover, they have low content of gene-related mitochondrial function.
Right.
Okay, so in other words, you're born with an impaired system to do this mitophagy from the beginning. Okay, where in such cases, then obviously these measurements are not commercially available. This is heavy research. But if it was available, we would know then this person should really be taking PQQ.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, it's
always a difficult one because
it's a difficult one to answer because we don't want viewers to understand that we are telling everybody to take PQQ or not to take PQQ.
Yeah, no, completely. Yeah. What other things is PQQ useful for in the body as a supplement?
Well, it's very good against lipotoxicity, which is a process that is involved in atherosclerosis, for example. And it is also good for, well, because of the mitochondrial effect, because it produces new mitochondria indirectly from there. There is everything in terms of energy and general functioning in the body. In terms of blood flow as well, it has an effect. It is a substance that is apparently been detected in stellar dust.
Oh wow! Okay, interesting. Sure, very interesting. I love these little nerdy facts that you bring, Paulo. Always a pleasure. Just last question before we go: where can we find Biomax?
I believe it's available in health shops and pharmacies.
Wonderful.